Hey everybody, it's Eric Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today with two very special guests, Kelly Chen, a partner at DCVC, investing in early stage deep tech, and Kane Shea, a investor at Root VC focused on industrial automation, previously at RE. Kane, Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, first, what in tarnation is industrial automation? What is in scope? What's not in scope? How do you think about it? How do you make sense of it? And how do you explain it?
Right. People often think about robotics in a factory when they're thinking of industrial automation, which of course is a widely accepted example. I think of industrial automation as anything that comes from a fundamental population shift and optimizing labor shortfalls. So an easy example here would be autonomous driving. And a not so obvious example, and something that I think about a lot, would be elder care. We're seeing baby boomers reach the age of over 80, and we'll also see in the next decade, the portion of the population of a caregiving age to these baby boomers will drop by half. So that means we need something, technology or otherwise, to make up for the physical and the social needs of caregiving that won't be available to these boomers. So in fact, caregiving will be one of the highest growth occupations in the US in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think anything that supplements that human labor on a large scale on this front counts as industrial automation.
And I want to second Kelly's disambiguation of industrial automation from robotics. I'll be honest, actually, that was originally my topic, but our friends at Lux and General Catalyst took that topic from me. So I searched around a bit, and I think the important thing for me is that industrial automation is fundamentally the closing of open loops in industrial processes such that we can now apply a lot of computational techniques and optimize those processes. But unless those processes are instrumented and unless we understand those processes in near real time with a lot of precision, like all this knowledge that we have about computational optimization, we literally just can't do it. And I think coming from software engineering myself, and obviously Silicon Valley dominated by software engineers, there's a lot of things we take for granted in software that are great. But obvious questions like, how much fuel does my tanker burn a day? Where did my crane put 2 tons of cinder blocks? And how many hotel rooms right now are occupied? Those are actually not really answerable. And until we can find means to answer them, we can't really optimize on them. And for me, that is what industrial automation is about.
So you, Kelly, you mentioned elder care. What types of industrial automation startups are you seeing in elder care? How would you describe that?
Right. So I had spoken about fundamental labor force shifts. And one of our investments is called Safely You. And they're using computer vision to most accurately detect falls for dementia patients. So dementia is a neurodegenerative disease. And what people often don't realize is that these patients fall on average twice as much as someone at the same age. So these guys have a lot of in the wild data on elderly falls, which allowed them to basically be able to detect them with the least amount of false positives. So now that you have this software in a room, you're not invading privacy in that you can record over yourself unless you catch the rare event of a fall. And in this case, you can respond as quick as possible, as well as find the reason for the fall, which often dementia patients can't remember.
Zooming out, we're going to get into the past, present, and the future. But first, I want to ask, how would you sort of create a market map, or how would you slice up, for our audience, just the space in terms of how people think about the different types of companies that would fall within industrial automation?
Right. I think the space is huge, right? You have anything from your whole manufacturing processes to all of logistics, which starts from your picking and packing and sorting to transporting onto trucks to long haul trucking to last mile delivery.
The hard part isn't even actually making the map of relevant industries. The hard part is selecting the processes within those industries that make good venture investments and good startups. Because to Kelly's point, literally anything that's not pure software falls under the bucket of industrial automation. If I have to move or affect anything in 3D space at any point, that falls in the category of industrial automation. And it gives us a pretty broad mandate, which is a blessing and a curse. And again, the challenge is finding the specific opportunities that we feel like are investable.
Totally. And I want to zoom out a little bit and ask you to sort of paint a picture of how industrial automation has evolved in the last, say, 5 years, last 10 years. Why now is a particularly exciting opportunity to build companies within the space, and how you see it evolving going forward?
When I was looking at the industrial automation or future of work space in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, I found most of the opportunities in the software space. And that's just because advancements in compute had allowed AI to take just a massive amount of data and make predictions at a completely new scale. So it opened up a lot of verticalized applications. And then now within the last, say, year or two, I'm really starting to see robotics catch up. And that's not necessarily because of advancements in hardware, but rather algorithms that are enabling computer vision applications like sorting and detection to have accuracies that now rival or surpass humans. And that's the main metric we need to hit for industrial automation. How to take previous workflows and make them more efficient, whether it's on the hardware or the software side, at a lower cost. And a lot of that cost right now is manual and repetitive labor.
That's pretty comprehensive overview of technological changes. I do think it's worth noting the part that's exciting for me as a seed investor is that there's this virtuous cycle of that technology making these companies more capital efficient. And as these startups get more capital efficient, there's more interest from capital to invest in these companies. And as there's more capital to invest in these companies, there's more interest in starting these companies. And so even compared to 5 years ago, when I was trying to talk to co-investors, trying to talk with follow investors, I remember I could probably count on two hands the people I was talking to. And now there's like a wealth of choice of smart co-investors and follow investors that are interested in the same space.
How should founders building in the space think about what are the biggest pain points here, and what do customers care most about?
And so I want to tie that question back to the idea of closing loops. Automation as an engineering problem is super fun. And the thing that I have to talk, especially to technical founders, a lot about is like, what are you fundamentally selling and what are you unblocking? Because if I ask you what you're selling and your response is a kind of technology, then you haven't really thought it through. Because at the end of the day, the buyer literally does not care about your technology. For the most part, they don't care about your technology. They don't care if it's whatever state-of-the-art thing you've built, or if you found a bunch of leprechauns and put them in a box and they're doing the thing for you. The buyers are extremely focused on their problems at hand, and that's usually one of two things. Can you unblock a process that could generate them a lot more revenue, or can you meaningfully reduce a big cost driver for them? Unless your product answers those questions, it's going to be really hard for you to sell your product. And bringing it back to the concept of a closed loop thing, the thing that we see a lot is sophisticated operators actually intuitively understand that their processes are inefficient and they're leaving a lot of money on that table. And what's challenging is measuring that with more precision doesn't actually solve the fundamental problem. And the example I come back to is if you think about fitness trackers for individuals, like I already know that I'm lazy and I'm probably going to die early. The tracker telling me that with more precision doesn't solve my fundamental problem and leads to churn. And so the product not only has to address a fundamental problem with either revenue or cost, but to the extent that it can, it has to close that loop and automate as much as possible. Just adding sensing is rarely sticky enough to be compelling.
Right. And related to biggest pain points, a question that I get asked a lot is, isn't automation taking human jobs? And the reality is most of the companies in the automation space that are successful are focused on the biggest labor pain points, as in the jobs that have the highest turnover as well as the highest shortages in labor. If you look at the trucking industry, annual turnover for drivers is often over 100%. And there's about a 50,000 driver shortage in the US alone. So it's a job with long hours, long time away from your family, and pretty low pay. And it's also the reason that we made an investment in this space, because these labor pain points for trucking companies arise from the grueling nature of the trucking job. And we feel technology has finally gotten to a point where automation is not only feasible, but it makes a ton of economic sense. So we think this is the future of trucking.
What do startups typically get wrong when they build in the space? What sort of examples can they learn from, or what are nuances or things to think about when building or investing in industrial automation?
I think, and this is something I'm guilty of as well, I think a lot of people coming from strong technology backgrounds, exploring opportunities in industrial automation, kind of go in assuming that there's a rational set of incentives among all parties. And that's rarely the case. And the first thing that you have to do, that you have to very explicitly do in a disciplined way, is figure out who actually benefits from what you are attempting to do. And there's actually a story here within our portfolio that I'm going to obfuscate a little bit because we still work closely with a lot of the parties here, but there's these really big pieces of equipment that I guarantee every listener here has been negatively impacted by at some point in their lives. And what one of our companies does is that they integrate a little bit of hardware and a lot of sophisticated software to make that piece of equipment extremely efficient, right? It closes the loop, and it removes a lot of downstream costs. So naturally, of course, the operator would want this. In this case, it turns out that the operators actually make money renting this equipment, and their best scenario is an extremely low efficiency process that gives them more rental days and reduces the actual usage, because then they don't have to maintain the systems as much. They make money on breakage. And it turns out that if you went and tried to sell your amazing system to these operators, like, they sandbag you, they accidentally leave your system unplugged, and from an engineering perspective, it's crazy. But once you realize what the divergent incentives are, it fundamentally changes what your product and sales process has to be. In this case, we actually found out a kind of roundabout way to sell the same system into the institution that contracts these operators. And that turned out to be not an engineering breakthrough, but a very specific business breakthrough that came from understanding what the incentives in the system were.
On our side, we like to meet technical teams early, often when they're just spinning out of academic labs. And there's nothing wrong with early, but often I see research projects or solutions in search of a problem, just any problem to solve. So I've seen some really impressive robotics with no commercial value, or just revolutionary technical discoveries or innovative patents with no real go-to-market plan. And then on the other hand, I've also seen technical founders with no experience in a vertical who just dive in and try to understand the biggest customer or industry pain points and just start tackling them one by one. And I like that approach a lot more. Commercial ability and unit economics should really drive these industry transformations. So I believe if you understand a problem space and costs and your solution is better, then you have a business there.
Where is the white space for something really interesting here? What would your request for startups be, or where do you want to see more startups come out, or where do you want to invest in?
This is by no means a comprehensive list, but things that have been on my mind recently: food production, by definition, an essential industry and extremely wasteful because of the perishability of the product. Construction, which is literally the world's largest industry, and interestingly enough, one of the slowest to adopt technology, and one of the industries facing the biggest challenges in labor volatility. In manufacturing, where we have this interesting situation right now where our design tools in software have gotten extremely good because of the advances in computation that Kelly mentioned previously. But these huge advances in software are breaking downstream production capabilities, because we're putting things into machines and processes that they had never even expected or dreamed about. And so even in the state-of-the-art 3D metal printing, as an example, getting a part to print correctly is still as much of an art as it is a science, right? Like we have a pretty broken tool chain in manufacturing. And something which is my most recent and least formed opinion, which I'm curious to learn more about, is non-pharmaceutical biotech, where I believe we are seeing similar shifts in unit economics towards efficiency that industrial automation has seen in the past few years and software has seen in the past few decades.
So I have a bunch of overlap with Kane in the construction and manufacturing space. I think they're both very interesting. I've also been spending a lot of time in the grocery and retail fulfillment spaces. Grocers have been just a lot more keen on trying out new technology recently, a lot spurred on by the competition from Amazon Go and Prime Now delivery. And it makes sense why they feel threatened now. Grocery is a high volume, super low margin business, and you see margins often in the low single digits. So any improvements that they make to labor, which can account for something like 20% of revenue, it'll really transform their margins. And then when you look at grocery labor, it's very high in turnover, and managers are constantly having to rehire and replace leaving employees. So within the grocery space, in brick and mortar, I think restocking, checkout, and inventory management are all opportunities for them to automate. We're also seeing a large growth in grocery delivery, which means automated fulfillment will be a key revenue driver. So I'm very interested in solutions in that space. In general, I like technologies that transform old school industries that have resisted change in the past just due to tech not being good enough. So with new technical limits and new economics that are now many times better what they have been before, the pressure to adopt in these old school industries will be just much tougher to ignore now. And a few spaces I'm seeing this in are in waste management, in specific verticals in manufacturing, and in specific lines within agriculture and food production.
How about the opposite, the anti-request for startups? Where are the bodies buried within the industry? Where would you advise people to spend perhaps less time on?
Low payload, low range drone delivery is one that I see very often, and it's a tough one. It's a space that suffers from lots of regulations. It's small in scope, and it's really tough to be dispensable, which is why we probably are seeing so many of these kinds of companies. I also think we'll see some consolidation in the eVTOL space, in the many LiDAR competitors that are coming out with different sensor fusion solutions, in components for autonomous OEMs. I continue to think that small satellite launch companies will feel pain. There's something like 80 different companies out there right now, many of which have started to shut down or have started to consolidate already. And there just isn't enough small satellites to support that kind of volume. We are already seeing winners emerge from that space. Also seeing a lot of last mile sidewalk delivery robots with very similar form factors and very similar underlying tech. And in general, I see a number of robotic solutions that are just too expensive and complex to be near-term economical, even if BOM came down massively.
Kelly's statement about robots remind me of a joke that goes around the office a lot, which is if it works, it's a machine. If it doesn't, it's a robot. The thing that oftentimes drives me crazy is whenever I see a company that proposes to use a general purpose robot arm to do either basic labor arbitrage or complete simple mechanical tasks that don't require the full degrees of freedom that the arm offers, or where the value of that specific action is low. I do think that as a result of a lot of technologies becoming cheaper or more commoditized, people are throwing a lot of technology at ideas or products and seeing what sticks. General purpose robot arms is something that, like I said, I go in by default extremely skeptical. The other thing is anything around predictive maintenance or generic sensor platforms. And to be clear, I'm not saying that there isn't going to be a big company that breaks out here. And in fact, I would bet that there is. It's just that this is where a lot of bodies are buried, because that happens to be kind of the easiest thing to sell, because it doesn't force you to consider the value of those end solutions. Now, if you arrive at building a sensor platform because you've clearly thought through there's actually no extremely high value end solution that I could be selling in a more capital efficient way. Therefore, I should offer this as a platform. That's fine. I just see, or my sense is that I see a lot of people that kind of go in building these platforms because they can without necessarily thinking through what those applications or where that value comes from in the way that I talked about before.
Let's talk about some of the spaces you said you're excited and go a bit deeper. You mentioned construction, Kane, and you mentioned also food production. Talk about subspaces with like where within those two spaces are you excited? What types of things you're looking to see?
Yeah. So look, if I had a very specific idea that I thought was amazing, I would be a lot wealthier than I am now. But I can explain my framework a little bit, which is when I think about companies that propose or sell industrial automation, what I very specifically look for is the generation of value beyond the arbitrage of the labor being replaced. And what I mean by that is the system isn't just doing what the human did, but cheaper. They are either unblocking a way for that system to generate a lot more revenue or unblocking a big chunk of cost in that system so that the lower cost can be passed through and generate more revenue as a result. Now, the way to think about that is what are the things that you can do with the robot that were previously impossible to do? And so an example recently on my mind is in harvest automation. A lot of labor shortages in fruit harvest has kind of led it to be a natural place where people are thinking about deploying automation. Now, if you go in and say, hey, I built this thing, it does your harvesting for you. Great. You've kind of anchored yourself at seasonal labor costs. Harvest automation should be pitching off the top of my head, the ability to grow denser because of the automation, which basically instantly increases your revenue per acre. You should be pitching how you can do high resolution supply forecasting, which decreases the amount of money left on the table because best guess market making and distribution really screws a lot of cash crop growers. And you should be thinking about all the ways that you're unlocking value besides just being a faster version of what you're replacing. That's really what I challenge founders to pitch. Frankly, in a lot of good companies we've seen, the value of the individual or the person doing that work is de minimis compared to the value unlocked. So much so to the extent that a really good industrial automation system doesn't have to replace the person there. In fact, they might justify increasing headcount because it's just leverage on the person.
If the GC and Lux team didn't steal the episode on robotics, what would we have talked about in that episode that we're not necessarily talking about here? Like, how do you think about the relationship between robotics and industrial automation? And what else would we have discussed?
Yeah, so robotics is a charged word for me because I think it has a lot of connotations. People think about anthropomorphic robots, or at least they think about industrial arms. Robotics is it's one of those things where you know it when you see it. But in general, I always challenge founders to think about if they were to front load some of the NRE or non-recurring engineering costs, could they build a system that is significantly cheaper and more robust than going straight to the robot, right? And in a lot of applications, going straight to the robot is like in software, if I spun up the largest AWS instance to run a simple query, right? Like, yeah, it does it, but that's not particularly like efficient. And so I think people being disciplined about industrial automation, or in this case, robotics, treat the general purpose robot as a tool of last resort. And I'm always curious to see what people thought about doing and conclude before they concluded that the robot was the right choice.
And Kelly, you talked about the grocery and retail fulfillment space where we are excited about. What types of startups are you excited about there? What are you seeing or what are you looking for there?
Right. So I looked all over in the grocery space, anywhere from supply chain, managing inventory, to your checker lists, kind of Amazon Go models, all the way to robotic fulfillment systems. You're seeing some of the large companies here kind of out of maybe FOMO, pilot a number of different startup solutions in the same space, because a lot of these solutions look very similar. So sometimes when you're meeting with one company and then another company in the same space, they're very excited about like, oh, we have this really big pilot customer. And then you realize that it's the same customer across a lot of these companies. So we are seeing the large players start to really think about adopting this technology. A lot of it is just challenging right now in terms of differentiating the tech. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges in the grocery space. But I do think that groceries as we know it now will be pretty transformed in the next 5 to 10 years.
So how does my grocery experience look in 5 to 10 years? Is it the Amazon Go model? How am I buying groceries? How are we buying groceries? How does that take?
Right. I think it will be mostly online. So right now we're seeing something like 2 to 3% of all grocery sales are online. And I think now with automating fulfillment, as well as all of these new last mile delivery options for you, like DoorDash and Nuro just raised a ton of money. Going from automated fulfillment to last mile delivery, it'll just be very streamlined, very easy, and people buy groceries on a very repetitive basis. Like they'll usually get the same exact groceries every time, so they don't need to go to the store to replace the groceries. So I think it'll be very regular and mostly delivery based.
So there's something I think about a lot there. And recently I read that Costco actually vertically integrated its chicken operations. They literally own and operate the largest chicken breeding and raising operations in the US. And that's because they literally have so much scale that it makes sense for them to do so. And I can imagine companies like Amazon or some of the tech unicorns in food delivery or in food production eventually reach some scale where it makes sense for them to vertically integrate. And these are companies that have the technical sophistication to implement a lot of industrial automation with certainly the cash incentives to do so. And I think the crazy thing, thinking about what Kelly said, is that we're not only going to see all these products and technologies available to the end consumer, the way that we've abstracted away businesses, like here's your grocery store, here are your farms, here are your delivery people, like those boundaries are going to blur and possibly fundamentally reshuffle as companies reach certain scale with, again, closed loop processes that allow them to make really, really big optimizations.
One thing we touched on earlier is how automation will affect jobs. Can you unpack a little bit about how you see that playing out? Who will feel the impact and how is it going to shake out in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the next 5 to 10 years will be extremely transformative within industrial automation. I think we're going to achieve self-driving, maybe during that time. I think in warehouses and factories, most of the heavy manual labor, as in the lifting, the sorting, and the repetitive manual tasks will be replaced by robotics. And that's something we're already starting to see. I think food preparation at chain restaurants, I mentioned grocery checkout, fulfillment, and various aspects around delivery. I think that'll all be automated. We're going to have increased visibility in our supply chains. They'll increasingly become demand chains. So there will certainly be an impact on these types of jobs. And if you think about Uber and Lyft, they haven't made it easy for taxi drivers in that most had to switch and adopt the new tech-driven driving market. And back in the day, the Industrial Revolution wasn't an easy change on the labor force either, but most people agree that it was a necessary jump. So I think with the fundamental technological shift that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a good deal of disruption, but it's necessary if we want to advance as a society. I think it's also important starting now that we do focus on both re-education of the labor force as well as education for the next generation. Soft skills, negotiations, as well as technical understanding will become increasingly important as we phase out some of these hard, repetitive manual labor industries.
I know Kelly has a strong background in finance and macroeconomics. I don't actually have that background, and I actually think the idea of quote unquote necessary is it's pretty philosophical for me. I think about it a lot more bluntly, which is necessary or not, it's inevitable. I've been watching this show on Netflix, which is excellent, called Peaky Blinders, which is about early 20th century Britain. And it starts in like World War I and it ends towards like pre-World War II. And interestingly, through the shows and the seasons, you see how technology changes in their lives. And I learned there was literally a job called a knocker up. And it's not as dirty as it sounds. It's just before there were alarm clocks or affordable watches, you would pay someone to come knock on your window when you had to go to work. Obviously, that job was obviated. On the other hand, I don't think that job should have been preserved, but people will face real struggles in labor markets. And I wish I had the perfect solution here, but I don't. And what I can hope to do is remain empathetic to these struggles, and aim to fully understand the consequences of what we're working on, and hope that we're aiming for automation that generates wealth and raises the floor for as many people as possible, given the inevitability.
Kelly, you have a background in quant trading. How does that, that's different than other VCs in the space. How does that inform your work and sort of give you a unique lens?
Right. So my background is in probability models and optimization, which later led me to go into quant trading. But basically, my background and what has driven a lot of my academic interests is operational efficiency. So I have 2 engineering degrees. I majored in operations strategy during my MBA. And I've been to over a dozen warehouses and factories by the time that I had graduated, just because of my interest and kind of obsession with streamlining processes. So I feel fortunate that I've kind of brought that interest into my day-to-day in industrial automation now. But I think it's this passion for optimization and efficiency that's really driven my focus at DCVC.
For people who want to learn more about where they can follow you online and where they can track you, where would you point them?
Yeah, so I'm just at Kane on Twitter, Kane. And if you're interested in industrial automation, I run an account called Machine Picks, Picks with an X, which just posts daily content on cool machines and industrial systems. And my email is my first name @root.vc.
And I recently finally started my Twitter journey, unlike Kane, who's been a long-term expert here. You can find me at Kaychen22. That's Kaychen 22. If you're working on an early stage company in the industrial space or in the future of workspace, I'd love to chat. And if you have any dissenting opinions, I love to hear them. So feel free to reach out.
And make sure to just search Kane and Ron Swanson. Just kidding. Thank you so much. It's been a great episode. If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.